A bizarre incident had occurred near the end of the 20th century. A German production company called Constantin Film had purchased the rights to a best-selling video game created by Capcom, with legendary director George A. Romero hired to write and direct. 1 year later, he was fired from the production. The case was apparently closed with the release of a feature film in 2002 directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. But questions regarding Romero's unrealized film and his removal were far from answered. In 1968, Image 10 unleashed a visceral experience upon the world that shocked audiences everywhere.
Night of the living dead, the dead who live on living flesh, the dead whose haunted souls hunt the living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures.
George Andrew Romero was born in February of 1940 in Bronx, in New York. His father was a graphic designer, and he used to make posters for films and for Broadway shows, banners and the like that. So when George was growing up, he was really in a household that kind of celebrated film.
He was one that took that love of film and actually acted on it. He didn't say, I just want to grow up and be a filmmaker. He started making his films at an early age, and the famous story of throwing the flaming dummy off the building and getting arrested at a young age.
George came to Pittsburgh to attend what was then called Carnegie Tech. It's now Carnegie Mellon University. And he came here to be an art student. Came, started taking his art classes, and eventually kind of got rolled in with some folks in the drama department, started doing theater, and eventually they kind of got swept up in, sort of emerging television. Eventually they knew that sort of this crew with Latent Image, which was sort of the company that they had put together. So you have George and Russ Streiner and Jack Russo and a couple of the Ritchie folks kind of all together working to figure out how they can kind of navigate this space. And eventually the idea came to make a horror film, that it'd be easier to get funding for, it'd be cheap, they didn't need a lot of skills, they could kind of pull this off. And they had a script that was adapted by Jack Russo. He had written this, Night of Anubis, it was the original title, but it was this general story that we know as Night of the Living Dead.
There was an aspect of it that was very surreal and sort of dreamlike. I remember when, the character Ben is clubbing the zombies, and like the way he's hitting them and the way the sound effects are kind of off sync a bit, and it's just kind of strange. It feels like you're watching it, you're just slipping into some kind of nightmare.
They really learned how to make a film together, sort of organically. I think fans know that George did not go to film school, neither did any of the other folks in Latent Image. They took their video production skills that they had learned from television and applied it, but they learned it sort of in a different way and on their own.
You know, some of the ways the characters speak are a little funny. You know, they're coming to get you, Barbara. It's kind of funny, but then it gives you a sucker punch and scares the shit out of you.
And it's like Roger Ebert's original review of Night of the Living Dead. He said these kids were dropped off at a matinee thinking they're going to see some spooky Vincent Price movie, and of course they're eating livers and stuff, and these kids were like in shock.
There's a pretty safe scene where there shouldn't be anything of menace, but then all of a sudden this zombie comes out for no reason and starts killing one of the characters who you've just met, and you're like, wow, like what's going on now?
I wound up going to Scream Theater and watching Night of the Living Dead, and you know, the dead are alive to eat the living. The weird thing is they made references to all these other places that my family would camp in when we'd go to Pittsburgh. So it was utterly terrifying.
I love that I can't tell if Night of the Living Dead is an old or a modern film. It just kind of splits two eras down the middle.
I'm 14 years old, and they're having a convention in Monroeville, and I see George Romero, director of Night of the Living Dead, is gonna be there. And I was like, all right, I wanna go meet this psychopath that would make a movie that would give somebody nightmares like this. Met George, got an autograph from George, realized George was one of the nicest people on the planet. And then this 14-year-old, cornered George Romero, and I literally cornered him in the hotel and was asking him question after question after question. And finally, he just writes on a piece of paper 247 Fort Pitt Boulevard, and the address, and goes, here, write me. Then it was just, we became pen pals, and I still have those letters.
I just remember the immediacy of the sequences with the zombies and how it felt like you were under a constant sense of terror and foreboding.
There were no R-rated movies before Night of the Living Dead, and Night of the Living Dead, of course, has no rating.
Until the Supreme Court establishes clear-cut guidelines for the pornography of violence, Night of the Living Dead will serve nicely as an outer limit definition by example. In a mere 90 minutes, this horror film, pun intended, casts serious aspersions on the integrity and social responsibility of its Pittsburgh-based makers, distributor Walter Reed, the film industry as a whole, and exhibitors who book the picture, as well as raising serious doubts about the future of the regional cinema movement and about the moral health of filmgoers who cheerfully opt for this unrelieved orgy of sadism.
That really made a big impact because at the time it was released, of course, on the news you're seeing worse stuff than that every day. People being burned with flamethrowers and all this Vietnam, the napalm and the skin falling off and shit. And so suddenly the horror movies were not that horrific because what you saw on the news was a lot more frightening.
I think George really took things to the next level on that. One of the most memorable scenes is when the truck is burning and there's flames flying everywhere and somebody's taking a piece of flesh and gnawing on it. We hadn't seen anything like that on camera.
After Night of the Living Dead, the definition of zombie would change. No longer inspired by misconstrued Haitian folklore, the zombie would now be your neighbors, your friends, your family, the reanimated corpses of the recently dead, seeking flesh.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
And while slow-moving, could only be stopped by destroying the brain.
Beat them or burn them.
Of course, it famously set the rules for zombie film, how zombies work, how the brain is the zombie, you shoot the brain, you kill it. And that's been the common trope ever since.
They didn't try to go back to New York City. They didn't try to go to LA. They didn't go to Chicago. They did it here in Pittsburgh. The fact that we still have a film industry here is because of the work they did.
This is probably the most inspiring independent film of all time.
For Romero, attempts to branch out into other genres were met with less enthusiastic results. So in 1973, he returned to horror with The Crazies, about a chemical weapon unleashed upon the population of Evans City, Pennsylvania, turning them into violent psychopaths. And Martin.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old.
The 1977 classic about a serial killer that believed he was a vampire. But it was his next film that cemented George Romero in the minds of audiences worldwide.
Dawn of the Dead.
Meet me on the roof at 9 o'clock. Get out.
I don't believe it.
We're gonna
What?
get out in the chopper.
The film followed 4 survivors of the zombie apocalypse that barricade themselves within a shopping mall as the world around them falls apart.
Night of the Living Dead has ended. Dawn of the Dead is here.
Filmed at the Monroeville Mall near Pittsburgh, the 1978 film became an instant hit, and the mall itself became a monument for Romero fans to visit in the decades to follow.
The movie opened up and they knew right away that they were sitting on a big hit film. Dawn of the Dead really turned Romero's career around, and it was a massive hit. It was released unrated because they were afraid they were going to get an X rating because of the violence in it.
In 1977, when Tom Savini asked me to do a role in Dawn of the Dead, we did the makeup, head castings, and when I got onto the set at the little Harold Brown Airport, the Monroeville Airport, that's when I first got to see and meet George. And he was in the middle of directing, but I could tell just by the way he moved. And sometimes you go by your first impression. And that first impression, I think, was pretty solid in terms of he was very gregarious, he was very friendly, he was very open and receptive, and at the same time, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. If somebody had a slightly better idea, well, let's hear it. Maybe we can bring that in.
When he was shooting, it was important to him to create a family atmosphere. In the years before I knew him, when he was partnered with Richard Rubinstein, they shot in Pittsburgh with a crew drawn partly from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Everyone knew and liked everyone else, and worked together well. Although I suspect the language on George's set was a little more profane than on Fred Rogers. At least it was when we made Monkey Shines, which turned out to be one of George's last pictures in the Burg.
Tom was behind the boxes, ready to pump the blood as somebody was ready to yank the top piece of my head off, the apparatus that is, not my actual head. And that timing was pretty precise. We did everything in one take. George was smiling. He looked at this was just great.
I discovered George Romero through my brother Tasso, who was going to Carnegie Mellon University with Tom Savini, who was just at the time becoming sort of known as the special effects guy, because he had done a film of George's called Martin. And then Tasso worked with him on Dawn of the Dead. They both did a lot of stunts and acrobatics and stage combat at CMU, and so they became the stuntmen on Dawn of the Dead, in addition to Tom doing all the makeup effects. And so, you know, Tasso plays several zombies and also gets killed. But as a kid, this is like really impressive shit. Like, your brother's in a movie. He's on the magic side of the screen now, you know. I grew up steeped in that. So that was my holy trinity, was Tasso, Tom, and George.
I got to meet George again at a place in Pittsburgh called the Pittsburgh Mattress Factory. They showed Night. Afterwards, there was questions, and George was George. He would come through the front door. There was no special treatments. There was no anything like that. And I'm just like, I can't remember. My mother's standing behind me, and she goes, he makes movies too. She just told George Romero that I make movies. And so with just stupidity, I went, oh, and smashed my face into the brick wall by accident. And after he checked on me, he goes, what I want you to do is write down all your questions, come down to the office, and spend an afternoon with me. I had my list of questions. We sat down in George Romero's office and spent the afternoon, and he answered all my questions. And when it was done, he goes, you know, I'm making this movie about these knights that ride motorcycles. I'd love for you to be my apprentice. Yes, absolutely. And so, did he inspire me? Oh, hell yes, he inspired me.
Romero returned again for a third, and at that time, final entry in this Living Dead series with the 1985 film, Day of the Dead.
On my 21st birthday, I got into the different scene and we ended up killing Rhodes. I remember George looked at me and I go, hey, it's my 21st birthday. And he's like, why are you here? And I'm like, where else would I want to be? This is the greatest birthday ever. Because I hung out with Tom Savini and all them, they trusted me with some stuff. So they put a blood pump on my back had it running down my arm, and I had Joe Pilata's legs. And so I pumped blood while we were dragging it. And then the intestines that were unrefrigerated because someone had pulled out a plug. They were just, the smell is exactly what everyone says. And when it was awful.
Just call it! Don't shoot! You're crazy!
Romero's films frequently placed the zombie concept into a larger context within the narrative. Night of the Living Dead was a story about a group of strangers surviving the night in a farmhouse assaulted by ravenous ghouls. But beneath the surface boiled social commentary on the civil rights movement and the treatment of African Americans in American society.
You can be the boss down there. I'm boss up here.
You bastards!
Having the strong black character who then is just killed by the vigilante hunters at the end.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes.
It was part of that zeitgeist to understand.
Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
There was this sort of racial commentary that was going through and reflection of the turmoil of the 60s.
Dawn of the Dead focused on overconsumerism, greed, and America's fascination with materialism.
We're in! Now how the hell are we gonna get back? Who the hell cares? Let's go shopping first!
Later films would challenge sexism,
Let him go! God damn it! Or I'll cut you in half.
class warfare, the war on terror,
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
tribalism,
All we were looking for was a place where there was no them.
and detached voyeurism while witnessing acts of violence.
We become immune to, inoculated.
These core concepts made George Romero's films feel raw, relatable, and real. That we could be these characters in that very same predicament.
I think George touched on a lot of universal themes with his movies, and I think that's why so many people were able to relate to them. Because it was the everyman. I mean, you would see the military and you would see other people that we weren't, used to seeing in our everyday lives, but he really focused on real people caught in real situations.
I think that is his biggest social critique, was that he just didn't have a lot of faith that humans could put aside their differences and work together when they really, really needed to.
All zombie media, after Night of the Living Dead, owed a debt of gratitude toward the work of Image 10 and George Romero. And without George Romero, there would not be
Resident Evil.
In 1996, Japanese game developer Capcom unleashed a new horror experience on the world. Biohazard. 1 week later, the game released in the United States as Resident Evil, a best-selling title for the Sony PlayStation that launched Capcom to new levels of success. For over 25 years, Resident Evil has been a sales juggernaut, with over 140 million total games sold across the franchise. Part of that success came from an immersive experience where players felt like protagonists in a horror film. Not surprisingly, its inspirations were deeply influenced by horror cinema. In 1993, a senior producer at Capcom, Tokuro Fujiwara, desired to remake a video game he directed 4 years earlier for the Nintendo Famicom, Sweet Home. The basic premise was that I'd be able to do the things that I wasn't able to include in Sweet Home. It was mainly on the graphics front that my frustration had been building up. I was also confident that horror games could become a genre in themselves. Based on the 1989 Japanese horror film of the same name, Fujiwara crafted a survival role-playing game with the player controlling the 5 characters from the movie, each with their own unique abilities. The player was tasked with exploring the spooky manor to solve various puzzles, all while trying to survive against a menagerie of monsters and traps that could permanently kill the characters for the remainder of the game. Fujiwara believed a new game based on the gameplay of Sweet Home, but utilizing new hardware could entice an audience.
Biohazard was intended to be a remake of Sweet Home, but because Sweet Home was based on a Japanese movie property, Capcom did not have the ability to use that license for their new game, so they decided to go with something original instead. And in terms of the development of the original Biohazard, it started sometime around 1993 when it became increasingly clear that 3D video games would become a technical and a creative possibility. The original creator of the Sweet Home video game, Tokuro Fujiwara, was a producer at Capcom at that point. So at Capcom, producers often have the greatest ability to get projects greenlit. Even after Sweet Home, even though they were able to create it and release it, it didn't do very well for Capcom, and it was never even released outside of Japan, which was another reason why it didn't really garner the sales numbers or the awareness that Fujiwara was hoping for. But with the next game, Biohazard, they were trying to aim for something a little more worldwide in its approach. They wanted it to be accessible and something that would showcase this new upcoming era of 3D gaming.
He found a young employee named Shinji Mikami, whose recent games Goof Troop and Aladdin were well received, and asked him to lead development. I ended up realizing that the game's enemies needed to be monsters of some description, as close as possible to humans in form rather than spirits. Yes, I thought, zombies. At that time, I recalled the film Dawn of the Dead. I loved that film. It was unfortunate, as far as the audience was concerned, that they couldn't survive. But with a game, the players could use their own techniques and thinking in order to survive the experience. I thought that this difference between horror games and horror movies could be something wonderful. That was the moment when I conceived Biohazard.
ゾンビってじゃあなぜ誕生してくるんだろうっていうところっていろんな映画によって違うと思うんですけれど、私は当時すごくウイルスに興味があって、でそのことをかなり勉強していたのもありまして、将来的にウイルスを使って生物を変えていったりとか、あるいは思うように操ったりとかっていういろんなことができるようになるんじゃないかって思ってたんですね。それでゾンビっていうのは私が入る前に決まっていたんですけど、じゃあそのゾンビにどうやって説得力を持たせようと思った時に、例えば細菌にやられたとかガスでそうなったとか、あるいはマジックでそうなったとかいろんな手段があったと思うんですけど、そのウイルスというのを採用しました。でそのウイルスを入れることによってまずゾンビになったことに対する説明がつけられますし、であとその他の、奇妙な生物たち、あとクリーチャーたちが誕生した理由にも使えると思ったのでウイルスを選びました。
I think the most iconic thing about Resident Evil is, pressing start and you hear that Resident Evil. Like it just puts you in the game. And walking into that mansion and just the sound design and the creepiness factor, going and exploring each room. And the great thing about the old PlayStations is when you had to walk up to the door and you go through it, you didn't know what was going to be on the other side. It would sometimes be a surprise, and that's what I loved about the game.
It was the first time I experienced that level of gore in video games, and it definitely helped ramp up the horror.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten.
This cinematic inspiration bookended the gaming experience through live-action sequences filmed to look like they were pulled straight from a horror film.
It was quite a long time ago, but I do have a fairly strong recollection of the day where we were shooting the outdoor scenes. It was kind of outside of the center of Tokyo, near the Tama River. It was a hot night. There was lots of mosquitoes. They were using smoke machines. There were some really cool props of the dogs and the hand that's holding the gun. And I recall running around in the grass. They would then just give us some direction, like, look this way, shoot your gun. There wasn't a rehearsal. It was all just kind of done by the seat of our pants. But it was a lot of fun. The crew were fun. And I think we didn't really know what we were getting into until we got there and we got into it.
No! Don't go!
It was almost like Resident Evil was a video game based on a horror film, albeit one that didn't actually exist. The gameplay consisted of action sequences with emphasis on exploration, puzzle solving, and resource management, all while combating the horrific enemies within its environment. The player chose between two characters, Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, members of an elite police task force, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, as they investigated gruesome murders in the mountains outside Raccoon City.
最初に特殊部隊を主人公にしたいというのはディレクターの三上さんの意向でした。で、私はじゃあそれにそのままスワットとかを使うという手もあったんですけれど、よりユーザーさんに名前を覚えてもらえるようにと思って ちょっとリアルだけど存在しない名前っていうのをいろいろ考えて、ある時スターズという名前をひらめいたんですね。でその中身も全部それを考えてやりました。
Trapped in a sinister mansion infested with zombies, giant spiders, and other nightmarish creatures, the two uncovered that the mansion harbored an underground laboratory with illegal viral experiments conducted by the pharmaceutical company Umbrella Incorporated.
主人公を特殊部隊にするということで、私、結構ミリタリーマニアだったので、特殊部隊、例えばスワットとかそういう特殊警察がものすごく訓練してるのも知ってたし、ですごい重武装してるのも知っているので、じゃあそれとゾンビが戦った時に果たして本当にゾンビ怖いんだろうかっていうのがずっと心配としてあったんですよ。であとゾンビが出てくるだけではその知性がない存在と戦うっていうだけで本当にユーザーさんはその先にあるもっと怖いものを感じてくれるかなっていうのがちょっと心配してありました。そこでそのゾンビだけでなくその背後にもっと恐ろしい存在を作った方がいいんじゃないかと思いました。それで考えたのが国際的に拠点を持っている大企業、特にその製薬会社、生物研究の会社という形でその当時伸び盛りだった、今も大きな会社になっているところ多いんですけど、そういうものを題材にして作ろうと思い立ちます。でそれによってその知性がないゾンビとものすごい知性を持っている巨大な知性の塊のような会社というその2つの組み合わせによって巨大な2つの敵、目に見えている敵とその奥にいる敵という二重構造にしたんですね。でアンブレラ社の方は一見とてもみんなのために役に立っている会社っていう印象を出しちゃったんですね。だからのでみんなを守るものって何だろうと思った時に雨が降った時に傘を差すようにみんなを細菌とかウイルスから守る製薬会社、生物会社として考えました。
In the end, Chris and Jill discovered that their leader, Captain Wesker, to be a traitor, battled the ultimate weapon Tyrant and narrowly escaped before the mansion exploded.
The game that I was in was pretty cutting edge for its time. I think it was really neat that they had the live action cutscenes in it. It wasn't just a shoot 'em up game, you had to solve puzzles. It kind of ushered in a whole new kind of video game.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
In 2007, I would meet Shinji Mikami for the first time, and he would tell me that the voice acting was done in Japan and recorded intentionally in a way such that Japanese people could understand even this level of simple English.
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
The idea was to make it palatable for Japanese people rather than international audiences, which I thought was a fascinating and ultimately an understandable decision.
I see. Well, it's not your fault. This place is crazy.
All of us, I think we just didn't really know. All we knew is that it was a video game, something that we didn't know much about. I didn't even know until 20-some years later that I was part of Resident Evil because they called it Biohazard.
Resident Evil sold over 2.7 million copies worldwide after it was released on March 22, 1996. An expanded version of the game, Resident Evil: The Director's Cut, sold an additional 2 million copies.
It was just so different for games that I played at the time that it was the most immersive way to experience horror. It was a brand new way to experience horror other than film.
It was an immersive experience that I was not used to with video games. And the thing that I noticed the most about Resident Evil was just how fucking creepy they were. The sound effects and the fact you couldn't see all the way down the halls and what the hell was that? Your mind would start playing tricks on you.
その短くなった結果、そのプレイヤーとゾンビが出会って、そしてそのゾンビと戦うっていうところもたった1回でやらせなきゃいけないっていうことを要求されたんですね。で、思い起こしてほしいんですけれど、当時今はFPS 全盛期ですけど、昔はまだ FPS って登場して間もない頃で、しかも PC ゲームではあったんですけど、コンシューマーでは立体的な形での FPS ってそんななかったと思うんですね。で プレイステーションも出てそんな経ってないですし、で特にそのコンシューマーのユーザーがその立体的に現れてくるその人間を撃てるのかっていうのはすごく命題だったんです。すごくそこには精神的な敷居があるだろうなと思ったんです。というのはその人間の形をしたものを撃つわけですから。そしてもう一つ、その出会った瞬間にゾンビが怖いとも思ってほしかった。そして撃ってもいいって思わせるぐらいにゾンビを許せない存在にもしたかった。それで最初に人を食べているのは人手の形をしているけどもはや人ではなくなっているっていうことを表現するためにあのシーンを考えました。そしてもう一つはその最初からゾンビが見えて近づいてくるともうそれだけでちょっとチープに見えてしまう心配があったので、振り返るということによってその一種人間らしさも残している、でもそこに知性はないっていうそのロメロ氏が考えたゾンビの恐ろしさっていうのを1回のシーンで表現できている相方をいろいろ考えてあのシーンのコンテを書きました。
Most people at Capcom at the time thought that the company was done for, heading into the second half of the 90s. And when Biohazard came out and surpassed anybody's sales expectations, I think that revitalized Capcom's business and gave them another hit to kind of move forward with. According to Yoshiki Okamoto, one of Capcom's other producers, that was one of the first million-selling titles on the original PlayStation.
Resident Evil was an explosive sleeper hit, and Capcom now had one clear goal: create a franchise.
That's a testament to Shinji Mikami and all the people at Capcom that developed it.
While a sequel entered development, Capcom sought interest in their newest hit video game to be brought to the big screen.
They got started on the sequel very quickly in early 1996. But once the original Biohazard was obviously going to be a great success, they assembled the team to go make the next one.
In January 1997, Variety reported a German film production company, Constantine Film, purchased the film rights to Resident Evil, with Alan B. McElroy, at that time known for Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, hired to write the screenplay. After I caught people in my office playing the Resident Evil game when it first hit the marketplace, I could instantly see its movie potential. We went to Capcom's headquarters in Japan to show the company that we got what the game was about and that we were capable of making a big international movie from their successful game. I promised them we would take their concept seriously and consult them on a regular basis. I think the prime reason we beat out any fierce Hollywood competition for the rights is because Constantine is an independent company. When we make decisions, we make them fast, because there aren't 100 other executives to consult. Capcom responded with equal promptness, and we were granted the film rights in 1997. By the mid-90s, Constantine Film was known in the United States primarily for producing The Never-Ending Story in 1984 and for an unreleased adaptation of The Fantastic Four in 1993. Made for $2 million, Fantastic Four was produced in conjunction with Roger Corman's New World Pictures. Constantine Film, having had the rights to the property for several years, were on the verge of having the rights revert back to Marvel Comics if a film wasn't put into production by December 31st, 1992. Principal photography commenced 3 days before the deadline. Recounted by the film's actors and even Stan Lee himself, the film was never intended for release. Critics point to the film as an embarrassing example of greed. But the truth was that Constantine Films stood to lose on their initial investment, an investment that later paid off when 20th Century Fox produced their own Fantastic Four film and paid Constantine as part of the deal. Alan McElroy delivered his first draft in May 1997. The script changed major elements of the game. The characters were no longer an elite police unit, instead a ragtag group of military veterans, each with personal problems exploited by Albert Wesker to recruit them. Absent was the iconic mansion of the game. Instead, the action took place within a top-secret laboratory built within a mountainside. As McElroy submitted his first draft, Capcom confirmed their partnership with Constantine Film through interviews during the Electronic Entertainment Expo event. Capcom showcased upcoming titles, including the highly anticipated Resident Evil 2. The movie was expected to film shortly, with a release near the end of 1998. But for Capcom, a sequel to Resident Evil that surpassed the original was the primary focus for the company. Capcom earned nearly $200 million in sales from the original, and the new director, Hideki Kamiya, felt intense pressure for the sequel to live up to its predecessor. It was all too realistic. The ominous atmosphere from the first game, as represented in things like the Spencer Mansion itself, the armor room, key items like the jewelry box and gemstones, all that had been removed. The police station too had been changed to a very modern building. As a result, everything felt too modern and strangely sterile. This doesn't feel like Resident Evil. Of course, wiping the slate clean and going back to zero on a project that's already 70% complete is no mean feat. And in that sense, I think it was a very brave move on the part of the developers. The original build was scrapped entirely after the team couldn't match the quality expected not only by Capcom executives, but also their own expectations. Now rebuilt from the ground up with a script written by Nobuo Sugimura, Resident Evil 2 was delayed to January 1998. With increased hype surrounding the game, Capcom planned an ambitious marketing campaign unheard of for a video game at that time, and committed $1.5 million on a live-action commercial to advertise the upcoming sequel. There was only one man they had in mind to direct.
That was kind of a big deal because it was the first time George had opened a lens on anything, especially something involving zombies, for years. And so that was big news. It made the cover of Fangoria.
We do have some materials that relate directly to the commercial for Biohazard 2, as it was known in Japan, what he was hired to direct a commercial for, Resident Evil 2 in the United States. And it's some of the storyboards for this commercial, some of the character designs, and some of the kind of artwork that would have been used to inspire this. A lot of information for him really about who the characters are, what the storyline of this was, so that he could kind of effectively make this commercial. He himself was not a gamer, so he was not familiar with these games, so some of this was to give him this background info.
Shot over several nights in downtown Los Angeles at the Lincoln Heights Jail, an empty and often used filming location for movies, TV, and music videos, the building was dressed to resemble the Raccoon Police Department, a location from the upcoming Resident Evil 2.
I wound up as a zombie in a George Romero commercial. I'm still marveling about that. I mean, that's, as a horror nerd, that's one of the great moments of your life. I was sent in for a commercial, and the request was there'd be heavy prosthetics makeup.
Not only was legendary director George A. Romero directing, but the production was filled with top-level talent both in front and behind the camera.
I said, geez, I feel like I'm in a George Romero movie. And the makeup artist says to me, didn't you see George standing out there? The amazing thing is the production, the call sheet, listed the director as Ai Kanbara. And that was a Japanese artist, Tai Kanbara had just passed away. And George Romero had always skirted the unions. He'd always stayed away from the DGA and everything. So what they did is, when George Romero had a pseudonym to direct this commercial, we're at Lincoln Heights Jail. I remember when I pulled up to Lincoln Heights, it said Raccoon City Police Department, and there was a zombie leaning on the sign smoking a cigarette, which was kind of the weird introduction to the world. They didn't call it Resident Evil, they called it by the Japanese title, which was Project Biohazard 2. When Romero came towards us, Romero was in flip-flops and he had an open collar shirt and baggy shorts. He was not dressed for October, the September-October California weather. He was dressed like he was going to the beach in June, and everybody, I remember his assistant was fretting, George, can I get you a coat? And he goes, nah, I'm good, I love it, I love it. He goes, it feels like, I think he said it feels like August in Pittsburgh. He just looked so comfortable. He pointed out to several people he had his lucky scarf on.
Brad Renfro played Leon Kennedy, one of two protagonists in Resident Evil 2. Brad had a massive following in Japan with teenagers, but his restrictive agreement barred the commercial from being played outside Japan. Adrienne France played Claire Redfield, sister of the original game's Chris Redfield, and the other protagonist for the game. Peter Deming was the director of photography, a cinematographer on iconic films Evil Dead 2 for Sam Raimi, Lost Highway for David Lynch, and Scream 2 for Wes Craven. The makeup effects were accomplished by veteran special effects artist Screaming Mad George, with prior work on films A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Predator, and Bride of the Reanimator.
It was incredibly fulfilling to work with a professional like Screaming Mad George, and he's such a great artist, and just to see the day-to-day work progression and the way it developed, and to see how people brainstormed ideas, I could tell he really wanted to give it a different take on the traditional zombie movie. So as you can see down here, there's a lot of the original prosthetics.
And then this is a shoulder piece that was for an exposed shoulder. So a nice meaty looking piece would be right here, and then it would be revealed from underneath clothes. Maybe the shoulder would be torn away.
George really wanted to take it to a different level, especially since George Romero, I understood at the time, was talking to him about possibly having him work on the movie.
The heavy levels of blood and gore that Screaming Mad George was known for were explicitly prohibited for the expected release format. Even still, the zombies had their own unique appearance despite the restrictions. Dried blood, torn clothing, and patchy skin were still visually impressive, invoking the work of Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero's work on Day of the Dead.
I'm sitting in the makeup chair, and they couldn't show blood. They were using black as like a dried blood. And I said, hey, you know, this is a zombie thing. Why don't we have blood? The Japanese company that was doing it was a little leery about blood. They didn't want to emphasize red blood in the commercial. So everything was fairly dark. It was more like we've been in the grave a while. That's why the blood would pool in our fingers, and our fingers are black.
The scale of the commercial led the production to film a making-of feature. Japanese press were brought to the LA set to interview the cast and crew. Perhaps due to Brad Renfro's contract restrictions, non-Japanese journalists were prohibited from the set, except for a sole Canadian-born journalist working in Japan. Norman England was granted complete access to the production, and Romero was more than pleased to share his excitement with the journalist about working on a project within the genre he had helped create.
Capcom flew me over to Hollywood to be involved with this shoot, and it was really a fantastic experience for me because I was not a part of the film world at the time. I was very fascinated by the film world. I was there for all their meetings. We go over to Screaming Mad George, big makeup artist. He worked on Carpenter movies, whatever, so many Brian Usna films. They made 2 spots. They made a 15-second spot and a 30-second spot. I was told was $1.5 million. And I asked George that on the set. I said, you know, tell me about this budget. And he goes, well, it's the most money I've ever had on a second-per-second basis.
Every makeup artist in town came by to kiss the ring because George Romero was there. So it was a who's who of Hollywood special effects makeup artists. Matt Rose, who did Hellboy, brought like 30 Dawn of the Dead from every different country for posters for George Romero to sign. You know, the Can-B guys were there to see George. It was just, as someone who knows every one of these makeup artists, it was just really exciting to watch them come one by one to pay tribute to the king.
We were done with the commercial. George got his reel from Japan. He screened it for quite a few employees on different occasions. And at one time he brought out the commercial reel and we watched the shortcut. There was a 15-second, there was like a 30-second, and there was this 2-minute long trailer. And then he said to us all, would you like to see the long version of it? And we were like, oh wow, there's a longer version than the 2 minutes? And he was like, sure, watch this. And we watched this, basically a short film directed by George Romero of Resident Evil. And I really believe that was George Romero's and Screaming Mad George's calling card to show that they could do the feature film.
The Biohazard 2 commercial released in Japanese theaters and on television, with the Making of Biohazard 2 commercial available to rent on VHS in Japan as well, all ahead of the game's release in January 1998.
You could tell he had misgivings about doing a zombie project for someone else. I heard him say once, at least to the DP, and 2 or 3 times just observing to himself out loud. He goes, when he was directing the zombies, he goes, I really feel like I'm ripping myself off here.
And everybody on the crew kept saying, George is going to direct the movie version. And I remember 3 or 4 hours into it, I thought, no, he's not. You could see he was starting to have misgivings. He would set up a shot and go, boy, this really feels familiar to me.
As part of its North American campaign, Capcom USA added a special contest for American fans, a chance to win an appearance in the upcoming film.
In my opinion, it absolutely encapsulated what Resident Evil was at the time, and it just made me want a live-action Resident Evil movie so bad.
While considered a gamble, Capcom's marketing campaign proved highly successful. Resident Evil 2 released to record-breaking sales, selling almost 400,000 copies and earning more than $19 million within 72 hours. The game had broken the record held by previous best-selling video games Final Fantasy VII and Super Mario 64, and would go on to sell over 6 million copies worldwide.
Biohazard 2, right out of the gate, outsold the original game, which was a tremendous feat at the time. In Japan, it sold over 1 million copies in its initial week, which at that time, I believe only 2 franchises in Japanese gaming had ever done those kinds of numbers right out of the gate, and they were Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest.
The Resident Evil franchise was born, and with hype surrounding the series at a fever pitch, getting the film into production was now the priority. And Capcom had their hopes in The Godfather of the Dead to make that a reality. When Alan McElroy was hired to adapt the game, Resident Evil was only 9 months old. Through the writing process, a sequel had been released, and rumors circulated that Capcom now had multiple sequels in development. This didn't bode well for the executives at Constantine Film, who quickly soured on McElroy's screenplay. Then the second game comes out, and all of a sudden your movie based on the first looks really dated and boring. And you say, what do we do now? Capcom had the answer. Hire George Romero. Word of Romero's commercial leaked across the early internet, and rumors persisted he was hired to direct the film. Fangoria reached out to George Romero for clarification, but he would only comment that he was interested. The comment ignited the fans, and rumors continued. Constantine Film announced that Bernd Eichinger would serve as producer on the film. Eichinger, a renowned German producer and co-owner of Constantine Film, had recent success with Smilla's Sense of Snow in 1997. In June 1998, PSM leaked details from a revised draft by Alan McElroy, dated January 22, 1998. This would be the only time information from the script was made available to the public. While excited to share the leaks, unknown to the magazine or its readers, McElroy's scripts had already been rejected.
The PSM article is quite interesting for 2 reasons. The details provided vary considerably from the May 28, 1997 draft that is found at the George A. Romero archives. The PSM article does include some sort of grainy image. Whether real or a mock-up, I'm not entirely sure, but it does have a draft date of January 22nd, 1998. So they're allegedly spilling information on a later revised script than the one the archives has, and this is the only time that information on this draft has ever been made available. Compared to the first script from 1997, the version in the PSM article shows that there's changes that make it closer to the games, yet some things are also removed. It starts about right, park rangers and campers getting mutilated in the raccoon forest. In the first script though, it's the Stars Bravo team that goes in and gets destroyed. Everyone gets killed by something unseen before they can even get out of the helicopter. There's certainly changed as far as the PSM article is concerned, saying there's no mention of Stars or Umbrella in the final draft, though they are mentioned in the first. It seems for the revision, Stars Bravo team was replaced as a generic SWAT team from Raccoon City. Some details of the characters also changed between drafts. Wesker is a captain within the Stars, an Army Special Forces unit, and his lieutenant is Joseph Frost, who is an ineffective suck-up that the other characters constantly mock or play pranks on. For the rewrite, Wesker is now in an asylum for some reason, but released back into command. In the May 1997 draft, Barry Burton has been changed from Caucasian to African American and is currently going through his 3rd divorce with his current stripper wife, who hurts him by taking his collection of comics and action figures. The revision only states that Barry is retired and runs a restaurant, so it seems a lot of work was really done on his character. Chris comes across as the hero, although he often acts like a bit of a jerk. Jill is the explosives expert and Brave Vickers is the team medic, although actually it turns out he's a guy named Mike who hacked into the Army's database to find out what happened to his girlfriend Rebecca Chambers, who was with the first team that went and disappeared. The original script was 114 pages. The first 58 to 60 pages or so sets this up and follows their training. I'm watching the pages go by, I'm wondering, when the fuck are we getting to the mansion? This is too much. The team flies into Raccoon Forest, and as soon as they land, they're attacked by monstrous dogs. The PSM article is where this differs. It seems to imply that the zombie dogs were the same from the game, but in the original script, they were dogs the size of elephants, and they killed Lieutenant Frost by tearing him and the helicopter apart. This is where it gets very interesting. Their skin is described as having a honeycomb-like pattern on it, and they're invincible, forcing the team to escape into the secret Umbrella lab. The PSM article describes the final version as a mansion/lab, so maybe McElroy made an attempt to show the actual mansion in the rewrite as a lab in the first draft was just built into a mountain. That's about the first 70 pages. The remaining ones are a series of scenes as the team gets picked off one by one. They did do the iconic zombie turning scene from the game, but it turns out to be a scientist that then begins to talk to them. I'm not kidding. They notice the same honeycomb-like pattern is on the man's face right as he attacks the group, and Barry's bitten. It seems in this, the virus doesn't really make you a zombie, but just makes you mentally unstable and homicidal. It also creates this weird honeycomb effect on your skin when you're shot, stabbed, whatever. The virus allows your wounds to heal, making you effectively immortal, but not a zombie. There's some dialogue about whether Barry's infected, and Chris argues they should execute him before he turns on them. And then there's discussions between the group all about this. Eventually though, Barry sacrifices himself to a horde of mutated scientists that swarm them all, allowing the rest of the team time to escape. There's more scenes with the not zombies. There's a scene where a giant spider emerges from the grate to attack the team as the not zombies are also trying to break down a door. Even the infected wasps from the game make an appearance at one point, attacking the team in a service elevator. Those scenes were actually tense and well written, and it was great seeing some of Resident Evil's lesser monsters get some attention. Brad is discovered to be the imposter Mike and is later killed, and eventually there's an argument between Wesker, who is ordered to get the research from the bottom level, and Chris and Jill, who just want to escape to the helipad on the roof of the facility. Wesker continues on alone, but when he reaches the bottom he discovers the entire mission was a trap, and the government sent Wesker to be the scientist's ultimate experiment because he was considered the ultimate soldier. 4 infected scientists strap him to a table and inject him directly with the T-virus. Chris and Jill make it to the top of the mountain and the rooftop helipad as the evacuation chopper is in sight. Wesker appears, now mutated into the Tyrant, and tells Chris and Jill that he's executing them for disobeying their superior. Yeah, he talks, even as the Tyrant. Barry suddenly reappears. He's described in the script as having reptilian skin, and I can only imagine it as like the game's monster, the Hunters, but with the head of Barry person. Wesker kills Barry after a brief fight, and like the end of the video game, someone in the chopper throws Chris a rocket launcher to blow up Wesker. Chris and Jill jump in the chopper, they kiss, and ride away. The PSM article says there was no mention of stars or Umbrella in the revised script. They were there in the first draft, so I don't know if there was a conscious decision by Alan McElroy, or if this was part of the producer's notes to remove those elements. There's also mention in the PSM article that, and I quote while trying not to scoff, no Resident Evil movie could be complete without a Jill Valentine shower scene, end quote. I can't remember if that was in the first draft or not. It may have only been part of the rewrites. It's fascinating to read the first draft and compare it to the PSM article, because the basic premise sounds the same, but you could see certain changes that occurred. McElroy was working through the concept, trying to deliver a script based on other ideas or notes from the producers. But the funny thing is, the PSM article ends with optimism for the script from the information they were given. But McElroy had already been removed from the project by then. Because of the timing of the article and what was about to follow, it wouldn't surprise me if the script was leaked to PSM in reprisal. We'll never know.
In July 1998, George Romero ended speculation. In an exclusive interview with DVD Review during the Video Software Dealers Expo, Romero confirmed he had signed an agreement only the week prior to write and direct the Resident Evil film. The truth is, Romero had taken months to negotiate a deal and make a decision. At some point prior to July 1998, the decision was made to drop Alan McElroy, and Romero took over writing duties.
Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, homepageofthedead.com was the absolute best message board for anything George Romero. That's where I spent a lot of my time, and I remember reading a lot of posts that, hey, George is making Resident Evil. I'm like, okay, I'm down for that. The rumor mill at the time on that internet wasn't very rampant. You got 1 or 2 bits of information, and you kind of hung on that for a while in a way that, George tackling one of my favorite video games? Like, how could this not be a win-win? Like, how is this not going to be a blockbuster?
I'm working on it right now. As I speak to you, I'm staring at my computer screen and I'm writing the screenplay. I think it's going to move pretty quickly. I think I shouldn't be speaking for those guys, but I think Capcom would like to have it released somewhere around the time they release the 3rd game. I don't know when that's going to be. Next summer? Fall? I don't know exactly.
Coming off of the excitement I had of the Resident Evil 2 live action trailer. At that time, there was nothing more I wanted than a live action Resident Evil movie. When it was first announced, I was so excited.
I knew the people that owned the rights, Constantine Films. They distributed the last 2 of my zombie films in Germany. Coincidentally, while they were developing the project, I was called by Capcom to do a commercial for them. Everyone got together, and Capcom thought it would be a good idea if I work on the film. The Constantine guys supported me, so that's how it happened.
And the Capcom people themselves, I mean, they were very happy to have George on the film, and they didn't hide the fact that Biohazard, the games, were inspired directly by George Romero's films. If they didn't exist, there would be no Biohazard.
They've already made some suggestions in the story conferences we've had. They're smart, and they know, or they think they know, what makes their games sell. That's the way they want it. The biggest piece of input that they had was that they don't want any of the human characters to show any remorse. Just blam, blam, blam. That's fine by me. During online chat sessions, Romero divulged to fans that certain elements from the game were planned to change and explained his process for writing the screenplay. My script tries very much to stick to the game. I did change some of the relationships. Chris is not a STARS trooper, he's a local guy. Jill is a trooper living in Raccoon City undercover. They fall in love. Chris doesn't realize she is working for STARS. Romance is not big in this movie. That's how they meet, and Chris winds up following the team into the mansion. That's basically the only big difference, that Chris isn't a STARS guy. We're trying to keep all the dark qualities of the game. We will probably have to shoot 2 versions because in the US and in many other countries, the violence won't be tolerated. However, in Japan and Germany, and many territories where the restrictions are not as stringent, the complete version will be released. I'm sure there will be director's cut versions released everywhere on video.
But it really does sort of follow, it's much more like horror and action script than I think than we see in the film that was originally released.
I have played the game with my son. I never beat it. My assistant actually set up a video camera and shot video of the TV screen while he played the entire game. This took weeks. He beat the game. I've played them with the kids, but I'm not hooked. I went through a phase where I was, back in the early Nintendo days. As far as I ever got was sitting there right after I made Monkey Shines with Drew Mattson. I beat The Legend of Zelda, and I thought I was hot stuff. So I quit while I was ahead. In a 6-week period, Romero, along with his producer Peter Grunwald, had written an initial 10-page treatment and 3 drafts of the script dated September 29th, October 5th, and October 7th.
And so we see the treatment, and then we have sort of 3 scripts. They're very congested in their time frame. So he wrote this treatment in August of '98, with a full script in September of '98, September 29th, and then we see October 5th and October 7th is the revision drafts.
Throughout the writing period, the story remained unchanged, though a variety of minor alterations and edits occurred.
The variances between the scripts is pretty scant. There are not a whole lot of editing. Here's an example of a minor edit from the October 5th to the October 7th draft, or even just something simple where there's just a change in dialogue to, say, from a scud to stinger. So I do think that October 7th one really is the final one that got handed over. Even the October 5th one just has minor edits, mostly about dialogue and some grammar that were cleaned up for the October 7th one. And so that feels like the most polished one that was handed off. The other big piece of it that was edited out of that last final one is it's the only version in which there is no note in the end for a title card of coming soon Resident Evil 2. It just, the screen goes black. The treatment and all of the other 2 versions promote and advertise that there will be a Resident Evil 2. Kind of right off the bat, that we're going to get a franchise.
George contacted friend and special effects artist Greg Nicotero if his company, K&B Effects, could provide the special effects for the film. Of concern was the game's climactic boss monster, the Tyrant. Nicotero contacted legendary horror artist Bernie Wrightson, known for his work on Swamp Thing, Cycle of the Werewolf, and the comic book adaptation of George Romero's Creepshow, and commissioned him to sketch designs.
My dad's collaboration with George Romero essentially began with a call that came from Stephen King, whom I believe he had already had a working relationship for then on Cycle of the Werewolf. Stephen was a fan of my dad's, and obviously my dad a fan of his. He got the call about this project, explaining like George Romero and I are basically doing our rendition of an EC comic horror anthology. Would you be interested in doing the actual comic book tie-in that goes with the movie. So of course he was interested. This would have been about 98 or 99. He got his first phone call from the guys at K&B Effects for this untitled Kevin Williamson project that Robert Rodriguez was going to direct, which ended up becoming The Faculty. From my understanding, Greg Nicotero read the script and read this giant sea creature alien that they had to build for it and thought to himself, we need a Bernie Wrightson creature for this project. And so they contacted him out of the blue, approached him about this project. He was still living in New York State at this point, and was basically doing his illustrations and sending them via fax. At this point, he had already been planning, at least in his mind, the idea of transitioning away from doing predominantly comic book artwork and trying to get more creature and character design work for film. So after The Faculty, he was prompted to basically move from New York State to Los Angeles, to further his prospects working in film. Contacted Greg about any follow-up projects, and that's how he got involved with Resident Evil. It's like, yeah, George Romero is going to be directing this adaptation of this video game, is he familiar with it? Not really, but, he knows what to go off of, and so that's how he came about doing the character design for the Tyrant, which, to my understanding, is the only character that he was designing.
After multiple revisions, Romero submitted his first draft. Now he would wait for Constantine Films' approval. The February 1999 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly published an extensive 4-page interview with George Romero, though the actual interview within had been conducted months earlier. While the interview left fans excited for the film, the EGM article marks the final time George Romero remained positive about Resident Evil. In May 1999, GameSpot interviewed senior Capcom producer Yoshiki Okamoto. When Okamoto was asked about when gamers could expect the movie in theaters, he replied, "We know the movie is going to be out there someday. There is a scenario coming, but there's no script yet, so the film isn't out of its scripting stages yet. That's odd. Romero's Resident Evil vision was supposed to be in progress months ago. The next question, of course, had to be about Romero's involvement. What became of his script?" Okamoto commented, "His script wasn't good, so Romero was fired." And with that statement, all hell broke loose. Rumors circulated. PSX.IGN threw gasoline on the fire with an unverified story from an unknown source that in retrospect sounded more like a smear campaign against the director. Another good industry source told IGN that Romero lacked the feel of Resident Evil. He essentially was turning Resident Evil into Dawn of the Dead, instead of making it new and original, the source added. He wanted to put sunglasses on the zombies and do other goofy stuff that didn't fit in at all.
I was very aware, and actually I'd been contacted by George's assistant. We're planning to come to Japan, and George really wants to meet up with you. I was very happy about that. And then suddenly the plug was pulled on this, and it was very disheartening that they would do that.
George Romero moved on to prep his next film, Bruiser, but any chance fans had to ask about the Resident Evil movie, George was just as confused. The internet says yes, but I don't know. I don't recall George ever being fired. I think we'd satisfied the first part of our contract, and Constantine decided not to go any further. In the end, Constantine wanted it to be an action film, which is what it ultimately became, right? But that wasn't what we had been hired to do, so that was the creative difference. George's version was fast-paced and exhilarating, a horror movie most of all. It was true to his roots and the roots of the game. I don't think Constantine was wrong in the approach they ended up choosing. It was just different from where we had all started. Between May and September 1999, Constantine Film had either failed to inform Romero he had been fired or were retaining him until his replacement was secured. Websites, news articles, and fan speculation continued to spread rumors that Romero was indeed still attached to direct, and confusion continued. Apparently, an insider in the production business has been frequenting prosthetics master Tom Savini's website, has hinted that George Romero may be leaving Resident Evil for good, even though Capcom has confirmed that George Romero was fired from writing the script for Resident Evil. He was still listed as the director. Apparently, neither Romero nor Capcom are very thrilled about it, and his name is currently used as the hook to draw in investors. The man is displeased with this, of course, and the buzz has it that he'll be leaving for good in the near future. The months gave way to rumors of new writers and directors attached to the film, but still, no official statement for Romero's termination and no update on the film itself. Would there even be a movie? After more than a year of speculation and rumors, Variety reported that Constantine Film had found its new writer and director of Mortal Kombat, Event Horizon, and Soldier, Paul W.S. Anderson, had signed with Constantine Film to write and direct the Resident Evil movie.
When that Variety article dropped, there just seemed to be a heaviness or a melancholy that was cast upon many of the fans. Some went even as far as to make a petition to have the film changed or cancelled entirely. Even though Capcom said Romero was fired, there were conflicting reports. It seemed even Romero didn't know what was going on, and I think many held out hope that he would still at least direct. So when it was announced that Paul W.S. Anderson was hired, there was some initial optimism. This was the director that did Event Horizon after all, a genuinely scary movie.
The plot synopsis caused revolt among fans of the series. Story focuses on a military unit that fights against a powerful supercomputer that is out of control. In order to save the world, the military unit must combat hundreds of scientists who have mutated into flesh-eating undead due to a laboratory accident.
But then with the plot announced, with its focus on supercomputers killing people, and just a minor mention of flesh-eating zombies, I think it was the website TNMC that I recalled summing it up best, saying, if you're hoping for a decent adaptation of the Resident Evil games to a feature film, just give up now.
Anderson previously pursued the film rights after playing the video games, but discovered Constantine had already purchased them years prior. Not to be dissuaded, Anderson wrote an original treatment dubbed The Undead. If Constantine Film passed on it, he planned to shop the project to other studios as an original zombie film. Unknown to the public or Paul Anderson, years of development on the Resident Evil movie had taken its toll. The rights were set to expire, and Constantine Film prepared to abandon the project. Anderson pitched The Undead and asked French producer Samuel Hadida to pay for the renewal of the rights. Eichinger loved the concept and hired Anderson to write and direct. Movies based on video games and cyber characters are a relatively new genre, so naturally early teething problems during development did occur. Everyone could see the concept would make a great action horror thriller because it had such a haunting idea behind it. But only when Paul came in, wrote a suspenseful script, and liberated the story from its game confines did all our collaborative energies spark and come together. After the announcement, a leaked casting call revealed most of the plot through its character descriptions, confirming the script would indeed be an original story. Fans became confused and irritated at the idea of a film based on Resident Evil lacking few connections to the actual games.
When the casting sheet was leaked, the fans immediately were more outraged than when the basic plot had released. Gone were iconic characters like Chris, Jill, and Albert Wesker. Instead we had one, Alice, and Rain. And the sheet even gave away some of the plot as well. Some fans of course refused to believe it. Others wondered if they were code names for fake characters and plot details to give the film an aura of secrecy. Most of the fans couldn't understand what any of the hell had to do with Resident Evil. It sure didn't sound like the game we all knew and loved at that time. And it didn't help when you'd see the behind the scenes. I remember when the movie released in 2002, Anderson was talking about how he loved the games, but he didn't want to repeat anything from them because we knew what was going to happen to these characters.
I'm a huge fan of Resident Evil games and have played all of them. As a diehard fan, I wanted a movie version that is respectful of it, builds on its premise, and delivers on its promise. To be scary, you have to be unpredictable, and that's why I wanted to use a set of fresh characters. We couldn't use the Jill Valentine character from the first game, for example, as the fans would know she wasn't going to be killed because she pops up in the later games. The suspense dynamic of who is going to live, who is going to die, and what people's allegiances are was only going to work with new characters. This approach also fits in with the world of the game, which is constantly expanding and introducing new characters and locations.
The irony is, he directed Mortal Kombat, also based on a video game. We already knew the heroes were going to win because they showed up in other installments of the games. Though it's worth noting, Anderson didn't write Mortal Kombat. He did of course write the script for the Resident Evil film. Had he written Mortal Kombat movie, maybe the same thing would have happened there.
Following Anderson's announcement, a review of George Romero's screenplay appeared on the website Ain't It Cool News.
The immediate fascinating detail of the Ain't It Cool News article on Romero's script is that the article was published right around the time that Paul W.S. Anderson is announced as the new writer and director. It's all as if someone purposely leaked the script in some sort of reprisal on George's behalf. The Ain't It Cool News journalist gushed over the material, and for almost a year it was our only deep dive into a screenplay before the full version eventually arrived online. Romero doesn't shy away from the game's source material and inspirations. There's definite nods to the structure and character of the film Aliens, for example, one of the inspirations for Resident Evil. It even has a character named Rosie Rodriguez, described in the script as, quote, a tough, body-built babe, end quote. Like his film Day of the Dead, there are also scenes of hordes of zombies getting sprayed by M16s while entering ever closer to their victims. Well, McElroy's script was 114 pages and spent half of that getting us to the start of what we recognise as the video game. Romero doesn't waste any time at all. The script comes in at a lean 96 pages, and there is economic use of the page, filled with scene after scene of gruesome monsters from the video game killing these characters in violent ways. By page 20 alone, our beloved characters are standing in the iconic main hall of the mansion. The script begins with shadowy figures in a conference room watching video footage of scientists being attacked by something unseen. A scientist, Dr. John Marcus, is pleading into the camera to keep the lab sealed as people are running and screaming, and he's ripped off cameras at topples, showing a canted view of a zombie tearing into its victim. It turns towards us and smashes the camera as the title pops up. Interestingly, there is a Dr. Marcus that would appear in the later released game, Resident Evil 0. Questions have been raised in the past whether Romero knew of the character while the game was in the planning stages, or if Capcom may have taken the name for the character. There does seem to be evidence that the character Dr. Marcus in Resident Evil 0 had just been created, so it's most likely George had access to some of the material and inserted it into the story. The iconic turning zombie also shows up here, and it's nice that Romero recognised that part from the game and inserted it too. It cuts then to Chris Redfield gazing at a flock of eagles he studies year after year. In George's script, Chris is a Native American. He's a rancher. There's a lot of Romero's prior works I feel bleeding in here, with our main protagonist being a blue-collar character. What's most interesting is Chris has changed to being part Mohawk. The 90s American cinema and television had an explosive wave of entertainment, including Native American images and characters, and sometimes telling their stories. We may never know whose decision it was to make Chris a Native American, as neither George or Peter have ever commented on this, but I could imagine there was a possible conscious decision by George, being known for telling stories directly through the eyes of the outsider, from Ben in Night of the Living Dead to King Billy's Knights and Knight Riders. It's worth noting also here, a minor detail, the Mohawk tribe originally from New York State, so perhaps this was a nod to the fact that George was from New York and he made his way to western Pennsylvania. Again, we'll never know. Chris has the feeling of being watched by something, and the eagles are scared away. He then goes back to his girlfriend Jill Valentine's apartment, where he attempts to explain what happened. They playfully chat, and as they roll over to make love, it cuts to Chris's ranch, where his ranch hand is attacked and ripped apart by something unseen. It then cuts again to Wesker, leader of the STARS team, getting a call from one of the shadowy government figures from the beginning that has ties to Umbrella. Wesker activates a team of soldiers working undercover in Raccoon City, including Jill Valentine, placed in the small town if anything ever went wrong at the labs.
The characters themselves are actually the characters from the game, so we see Jill and Chris as being the main characters. We have Wesker as the sort of main villain, none of which find their way into the Anderson film. And it does feel a little bit more like a game.
Jill, leader of the STARS Bravo team, leads the group into the Arclay Forest, where they're attacked and aggressively torn apart by monsters we never fully see, and Jill's fate is left unclear. Wesker gives the order to evacuate all of Raccoon City, which in the script sounds more like the real-life town of Evans City, where both Night of the Living Dead and The Crazies were filmed. There's also a definite comparison to The Crazies, with a scene of soldiers pulling people out of their houses in a forced evacuation. There seems to be some subtle commentary here with Chris, an indigenous person fighting against being forced out of his home by government soldiers, and the actions of a shadowy government too.
The social commentary in it is the sort of, both the military group and of course the Umbrella Corporation are not to be trusted, that they created a biowarfare thing that was immediately going to be used for ill. That there was no capacity for them to have made these experiments and have done something that could be used in a positive way. And in particular, when the military got their hands on it, that it would absolutely be used for its worst possible way in weapons and warfare. And so I think that directly comes from the game to an extent, but I think is also part of Romero kind of, if we kind of go back and look at some of the commentary that we see in Day of the Dead, is this sort of critique of over-militarization, this sort of like melding between the military and politics and corporations to sort of have this sort of fascist theology that we see kind of emergent. And I think that he sees that this is another story to tell that ultimately when a new weapon is going to be developed, we can't really trust it not to be used for maximum harm. That it wouldn't be used in a way that's defensive, but it would be used in a way that's offensive and would immediately get out of control. I think that some of the other ways that things were changed about whether characters were in the military or not, I think were done to dramatic effect. to kind of compel the story a little bit more. It gave an interaction between Chris and Jill that's very different. They're lovers, they don't know entirely how much they can trust about one another. So it kind of leads to this dramatic interaction between the two of them as it moves forward. But I think really it's just that Wesker is that sort of like embodies all of this critique that, you know, he's lying to everybody, he's leading them all on a false mission just so he can monetize and ultimately exploit these weapons. And I think that kind of goes again, that people just aren't going to be able to get along with one another when needed. Rather, they're going to just further the apocalypse.
Having found out Jill was a soldier and having escaped forced evacuation, Chris heads to his ranch, where he finds his horses and dogs mutilated and his ranch hand near death. Romero doesn't script on the gruesome details here, and had it been filmed, it would have been one of the most stomach-churning scenes he probably ever did due to the animal violence alone. Chris, now angered that his ranch is destroyed, his friend dead, his girlfriend a soldier, follows Wesker's helicopter as he sees flying over to the Arklay house, a ruined mansion once owned by a bootlegger that the government secretly now owns. Chris played here as a kid, and the original owner set up trapdoors and hidden passageways, tricks that help him throughout the script as he avoids danger. At the time, most of the mansion's history was only available in information released in Japan and nowhere else, so it's compelling to see George making his own backstory and his own reasons for there being traps and secret doors. Bootlegging was a major business in Pennsylvania during the 1920s and around the Pittsburgh area, so George seemed to be trying to ground some of the game concepts into Pennsylvania history to explain the mansion sitting in the middle of the woods. Wesker's second in command is Barry Burton, described as, quote, a muscular black man the size of a grizzly with the heart of a teddy, end quote. Wesker and Barry have been friends since childhood and have served together in the army for 18 years. It's unknown if making Barry African American was a studio note, whether George kept that idea from McElroy's script, or whether it was a conscious decision by Romero himself. It does give this neat callback though. The characters of Wesker and Barry seem to invoke the friendship of Roger and Peter from Dawn of the Dead. Again, I'm not sure if that was meant by George, if it was an unconscious choice, or if in his mind he envisioned casting actors Scott Reiniger and Ken Foree in those roles. Wesker's team is attacked by zombie dogs, and they make their way into the mansion where Jill turns out to have survived, regrouping with the rest of Wesker's team. The mansion itself is ominous, much darker than in the video game. Romero described it as, quote, a haunted house, a glorious ruin, once spectacular, now mysterious and threatening. The chandeliers and furnitures are covered with sheets that ripple on breezes from 1,000 faults in the old walls. Indistinct noises echo from within the ceiling. The floor, end quote. The house had been seized by the government and granted to the Umbrella Corporation to perform experiments with the T-virus for military use. The team descends into the labs, their mission to rescue Dr. Marcus. He's found already turned into a zombie, and the soldiers waste him. Wesker tells the group they now have to retrieve the vaccine. Chris, having followed and so far managed to avoid being discovered, is now caught by Wesker's team and forced to join them. They descend from level A, then to B, then C, and finally to level D, where they find a group of scientists still alive, including Ada Wong. What's interesting here is that Romero seemed to be inspired more by John's letter in the original game that implied Ada might have been a scientist there, and in the scrap version of Resident Evil 2, she indeed was, not the international spy that Ada became in the retail version of Resident Evil 2 and later titles. Through their descent, you can feel how cramped and claustrophobic the labs are, with narrow passageways, small rooms of computers and desks, and it really does have that menacing, desperate feel that Day of the Dead had, that there's no escape. There's plenty of gruesome zombie scenes as they rip into soldiers, tearing out chunks of flesh, tearing people apart. Descriptions invoke much of the special effects work of Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero. But beyond zombies, much of the game's monsters are represented here through terrifying sequences. There are giant zombie sharks that attack the soldiers after their containment tanks burst open and the room floods with water. The giant snake snatches up Richard Aiken much like the game, crushing his ribs and swallowing him. The enormous Plant 42 sucks out all the blood from Kenneth Sullivan, leaving a dried husk. There are zombie crows that make an appearance, and there's an entire group of the game's hunters that stalk the team throughout the script, an entire sequence where they shred a soldier with their claws practically splitting him in two. The hunters are spectacular. It seems Romero combined the general characteristics of the Chimera monster from the first title with them, creating something that keeps the feel of them while visually making them more nightmarish, more terrifying. Nowadays this probably wouldn't fly so well with the fans, but the changes definitely made them more menacing on the page. One soldier unloads an entire magazine into a hunter's face, revealing metal plates grafted under their skin. They eventually start shooting them in their joints to incapacitate them. Throughout the script, the level of gore is both impressive and disturbing. There's a front end of a small dog with a crushed paw that's now a zombie, trying to pull itself along the ground. The zombie tries to stand up, with its guts spilling out. Zombies are constantly getting sprayed with automatic rifles, along with a lot of headshots. One of the soldiers, after having a chunk of his neck tore out, then eats the barrel of his own pistol in front of the team. Another soldier gets melted by a trap that sprays him with acid, while a partially melted zombie keeps attacking the group. Joseph Frost dies pretty much like the game, getting torn apart by zombie dogs, but with his heart ripped out through his back. It's pure Romero-style gore on every other page. By the end, the team realises that Wesker is betraying them, and there is no cure. He needed the firepower to get to the bottom level to retrieve the research data so that he could sell it on the black market. He even has a failsafe to escape, a device linked to the bombs under the complex that if his heart stops will trigger a short countdown to a nuclear explosion. Wesker is stopped by his friend Barry Burton as the original game's final boss. The Tyrant breaks free from its cryotube. Wesker betrays Barry and kills him. Before he can escape the lab with the data, he's skewered by the Tyrant. Again, this is very much like the game. During the chaos, Brad Vickers, who is a computer techie in the strip rather than the team's pilot, was infected prior in the story and succumbs finally to the T-virus, turning into a zombie and ripping into one of the scientists. Another callback to the games where you could find Brad as a zombie in Resident Evil 2. Some additional Easter eggs were also present. The Umbrella contact in Washington was named Holden, the same name for Wesker's contact in the comic book published by Wildstorm. The red and blue key cards are from the second game, and the green card was even in 1.5. The colours also align with the herbs used by the characters in the game. The iconic spitting tiger statue was featured. So again, there's all these little things woven through that showed George had indeed studied the games, even if he made conscious decisions to make the adaptation different also.
It has a lot more in common with the game than the Anderson film does. I think there's also a lot more Easter eggs in this probably that are better for fans of the game, like the zombie sharks. There's a couple of scenes where the character's like, oh, I can't open that door, and the person's like, well, I have the green key, you just have the blue one so I can get through this, which feels very much like video games where you have to wander around and go find the different colored keys or items or whatever to open different passages through the game.
There's only a handful of survivors by then. They kill the Tyrant by shooting it with a rocket launcher, just like the game, and the group is picked up by their waiting chopper to fly off. They narrowly get clear of the blast radius as the labs, the forest, and all of Raccoon City is obliterated. The dialogue throughout isn't entirely terrible, but needed some attention. This was the first draft after all, and it seemed Romero was more focused on getting all the details in order. It's really not known what could have changed had he been allowed to continue. Surely the dialogue would have been improved though. It's quite possible that the script would have lost some of its monsters or gore scenes. This definitely would have been an expensive script to produce, especially with the fact it would have been most certainly an NC-17 for its gore alone. Perhaps Raccoon City wouldn't have also been blown up, allowing for a proper adaptation of Resident Evil 2. George's script is known by his fans for changes throughout the development as he worked through the story and took notes, so we'll never know where this would have gotten to eventually. Sure, the script wasn't perfect, but not a lot of first drafts are. The framework for a horror film was there, and no less the beginnings of a very unique adaptation of the games that elaborated on its material at the time, and included the social commentary that George was known for. Considering many of the films we got were bemoaned by fans and critics for being mindless action film, it's disheartening to know that Romero was trying to show even audiences not familiar with the games that this game was something special, as much horror as action, and even if I don't agree with all the changes myself, I can appreciate what he tried to do and why he did it.
George Romero was a pioneer in his field, not just in horror movies, but in horror pop culture. Having him involved in the series so early on, I think, would have had the potential for him to leave a blueprint that could have been a massive presence in video game to movie adaptations.
I think that a lot of times he wrote these sort of longer treatments to kind of get out of his head the story he wanted to tell, particularly with an original idea. Like, just get all this out, and then maybe start to fit it into a script form, start to think about how it can be dramatized, how you can kind of fit it into scenes and sort of do this so it's not told in a prose style. And many of his first drafts are a little rough, they're good, and usually just need that sort of that work because I think it is just sort of he has an idea and he needs to get it out. I think with Resident Evil, there's very little substantive edits between the drafts. It's some dialogue that's fairly minor. It is, changing around a couple of scenes or sort of the progression of how something happens to, as they go between maybe one level of the lab to another. The only real significant differences is kind of about some of the foreshadowing about the BOW, bioweapons, and the Tyrant. Some of the first draft has some allusions to it that kind of foreshadow or give away what these things are, and then those are sort of omitted later to sort of, propel that there's more suspense. You don't really know what's going on. You're following the story and getting the info revealed to you as the characters are also having that information revealed to them. I mean, I think you would be surprised to find any filmmaker that writes one draft of something and then they're done with it.
A year later, website Resident Evil, A New Blood transcribed the entirety of George Romero's October 7th draft after months of circulation within private groups. Fan reactions remained divided.
I remember reading it in a PDF format, scrolling all the pages, sitting on the computer screen, reading it. I kept thinking, like, this would be an amazing movie. Why? We love the video game, we love George. George is the master of the zombies. How did we not get this? And ultimately, I think it's one of the biggest missed opportunities in the last 20, 30 years of movies that we didn't get a George Romero Resident Evil movie.
After more than 5 years since its announcement, Resident Evil, starring Mila Jovovich and Michelle Rodriguez, released in theaters on March 12, 2002, earning more than $100 million worldwide off an estimated $30 million budget. Critical and fan reception remained mixed, however, and with each new sequel, the same question would be asked. Would George Romero's vision for the film have been better than the film we ultimately received?
I went to the theater the day it released. I could not wait to see it. And I remember the excitement I had kept me going through that film, but I just remember there were scenes where I was like, where's more zombies? Where is this from the games? Where's that from the games? And I was young and I didn't understand at the time that they were trying to do a retelling of it. And I think for the most part they did a well job with the first Resident Evil movie, but there was a part of me that just was a little disappointed that we didn't get to see a lot of the things that we've seen in the games, a lot of the creatures that we've seen in the games. And I was excited, I enjoyed it, but I was a little disappointed.
But the honest damn shame was Resident Evil. We busted balls writing drafts of that screenplay. I'm talking marathons, 72 hours straight. I really wanted this project. I felt that Resident Evil was a ripoff of Night of the Living Dead. I had no legal case, but I was resentful and torn because I liked the video game. I wanted to do the film partly because I wanted to say, look here, this is how you do this shit. Romero further explained that while he seemed to connect with producer Rob Kulzer, his frustrations were with Bernd Eichinger. They'd bought the game, but I don't think they knew what it was. The executive I dealt with was a young guy who was turned on to it, but the head of the company just did not understand it. Doesn't even know what a video game is. He wanted it to be something different. I mean, this is the guy who made Das Boot, so he wanted something prestigious. I told him, that's not the spirit of the game.
It is an extremely gory script, an extremely violent script, and Romero is noted fair and unfairly for having that kind of throughout his work. I think because of the way some of the gore was employed in like Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead, it doesn't feel very gory. It feels campy almost. But there's so much more going on. Like there's a lot of great zombie gore that, you know, he had great special effects teams, of course, with Savini and Nicotero that we see this stuff, but this film just feels so much more gory, so much more violent, and so much more angry. And I don't know if it's because he felt that was the source material. I don't know if it was just sort of where he was at in his head in the 90s and at this time that he was writing that this is sort of what came out.
We said, this is easy. You take the first game, a bunch of commandos go in and shoot up the place, blah, blah, blah. With George, we could have done a great zombie movie for a very, very limited audience. We could not have shown it in a regular theater, we could not have shown it on television, and the video would have been sold in the X-rated section. Then you can make a $2 million movie, but not a big event movie. From Constantine's perspective, the extreme violence and gore in Romero's script left producers struggling how to market a film they envisioned as an event film for a wider audience.
I think this was another reason maybe that we didn't see this come to fruition, was that the 90s were fairly conservative in a lot of ways, and I think this would have been a film that would have been rated NC-17 or R, and we already had a few NC-17 films come out in the 90s that were absolute bombs at the box office because not enough people could go see them. Horror fans love to go see an R film because we know it's going to be really gory, but the studios wanted kids to come in and they wanted that demographic of 13 to 18 buying tickets.
The Resident Evil game wasn't too gory or too violent, just completely terrifying to play.
Probably wasn't going to be right for that time period. It was not going to be able to be widely released in theaters with the level of gore that was going to be required for it.
If Eichinger's stance wasn't made explicitly clear, he further elaborated when he was interviewed by German digital magazine Spiegel Online when the movie released. Many will criticize the film for its unbridled lust for violence. Oh, where? I really don't think so. Virtually no blood flows. In the end, yes? But that doesn't flow. That is painted. We really paid attention because I don't like that. I don't like violent films. I beg your pardon. In Resident Evil, people are beheaded or cut into cubes by laser beams. Yes, but then it's over. It's almost weird because it's so absurd. You can just see that as a cut. Otherwise, blood does not even splash when shooting. They are already dead. Incidentally, George Romero has already said that. Romero really burst heads like melons. You can't do that anymore. Seriously, it is really important to me that I do not find this violent. I've never been in a situation where I was willing to say, okay, let's do this piece of shit. I've always fought back, and that's probably what happened with Resident Evil. I kept trying to preserve the personality I thought it should have, and what happened is that the executive was very encouraging, but by the time it got to the man, it wasn't what he wanted. I don't know what he initially saw in the property, probably name value, because he certainly in my mind was looking in a different direction. I guess it was what they call creative differences.
It's a mean-spirited market that is mostly controlled by people still that have no affection or affinity for not only this genre, but for movies in general. They think that, you know, when they give you their million, that they're buying you.
I guess you could say it was so upsetting that you have the godfather of the zombie horror genre, the person who inspired the Resident Evil series, lined up to make a movie, who has already proven himself countless times with his films, with the Resident Evil 2 trailer. This guy knew Resident Evil, so when I found out he wrote the script and it never came to be, it was very upsetting. I feel like if anybody was going to do the Resident Evil series justice, it would have been George Romero. Again, he's the godfather of the zombie horror genre.
Romero's kind of famously had bad luck. I hate to say it. He's been unlucky in a lot of ways. He's very independently minded. He doesn't like to deal with nonsense. He has a very low tolerance for nonsense. And in the Hollywood is got a very huge, thick layer of nonsense. So the most successful directors in Hollywood are the one that can manage that, and George just was not that type of person. He would not sell his soul just to get a film done.
He understood how zombies should behave. He understood storytelling. He understood all of the fear and terror and tension that Resident Evil is known for. So no better guy to do it than George A. Romero.
So we have a treatment, a September and 2 October drafts in the archive. Whether anything else was ever written is a little hard to say, but one thing that the archive does very well is document his creative history. There are huge gaps in production histories, but his writing is very well documented. And so I think that we can say that this is what he wrote, that there aren't missing drafts and missing versions. So I do think that we can confidently say that he really worked on this for a little over a month.
Baron Eichinger's personal campaign against extreme violence and gore conflicted with George Romero's passion to match the tone of the video game. This creative dispute resulted in George's dismissal. Perhaps the biggest crime of all, the Resident Evil film resulted in a renaissance of the zombie horror genre, with hundreds of new zombie movies released, while the godfather of the dead himself became less relevant as the new millennium wore on. Is it no wonder his later films failed to garner attention when the industry was already oversaturated with zombie media? Romero would return to the series he created with his long-in-development sequel, Land of the Dead, in 2005. Romero directed 2 more entries, Diary of the Dead in 2007 and Survival of the Dead in 2009. He made many deals before and after Resident Evil. Some worked out, some didn't. For Land of the Dead, it was a big project, big studio, big budget, big production. But there were more management layers than George preferred. More mouths to feed, more egos to feed, more trouble than there needed to be. The picture was a success and the reviews were very good, so there were offers for more studio films, but George wanted to be independent. The projects we did after that gave him more control in exchange for more manageable budgets.
He was later in life a little bitter about the course that his career had taken, but personal note, I mean, I really respect his life choices and the way he really stuck to his guns.
By then, Capcom already felt zombies were a tired trope and sought to reinvigorate the series with new, horrific creatures to keep players returning. Resident Evil 4 released in 2005 to overwhelming praise, with sales exceeding 12 million copies worldwide. The series shifted focus to action horror gameplay until returning entirely to horror with the release of Resident Evil 7 in 2017 and Village Resident Evil 8 in 2021. Combined, the two games sold over 19 million copies. Capcom also remade older entries in its series with updated gameplay for modern audiences. In the past decade, Resident Evil games averaged 10 million copies sold per release. Capcom's survival horror franchise had never been stronger. Constantine Films released 6 films with Paul W.S. Anderson, with combined box office earnings over $1 billion worldwide. Constantine rebooted the film series with Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City, directed by Johannes Roberts, released in 2021 to underwhelming reviews and box office. A Netflix series, simply called Resident Evil, released the following year, received far better with critics and audiences. Netflix canceled the TV series a month later. Rumors persist of a new film in development.
The movies are always going to be unique in that they're based on a video game that was inherently based on movies, or a genre of movies, and there's always going to be a logistical challenge and a creative challenge to replicate the kind of impact that movies and TV series aspire to have, but without any of the cliches or the shortcomings that, or the differences for that matter, that video games bring to the table. So I don't think there has been a perfect rendition of Biohazard on movie theaters or TV screens, but I'm enthusiastic that if they can find the right talent and they can see more recent examples of successful video game movies, also more recent just horror movies in general, I think if they can focus on that, we can definitely see a good Biohazard live action interpretation in our lifetime.
As the 21st century wore on, and hundreds of zombie films consumed by audiences, one fact became absolutely clear. Every single one were indebted to the work of Image 10 and George A. Romero.
What do you think about these offshoots or tributes or rip-offs of the Dead movies, specifically Return of the Living Dead and, of course, now The Walking Dead?
In 4 words, it pisses me off.
And I'm sure it seemed like an easy idea at the time, but it changed the world. Walking Dead, I mean, there's zombie emojis on your phone now. Why? George, Jack, Russ, those 3 guys.
In 2009, Spike TV's Scream Awards honored George Romero with the Mastermind Award given by director Quentin Tarantino. During his speech, Tarantino stated that the A in George A. Romero stood for
A f***ing genius!
He was someone that every time you would tell him, your movies changed my life, or your movies, you could hear the man just blush and he would say, oh, I don't know about that.
Despite his age, Romero remained productive with attempts to adapt the novel The Zombie Autopsies to film, a 7th entry of his Living Dead series called Road of the Dead, and began work on a novel set in his universe called The Living Dead. Romero would never finish these projects.
When I saw George, this was in March of 2017, as I recall, maybe April, like somewhere in the spring. And I walked up to his table, and when I saw him, a part of my brain kind of panicked because he would look very frail, very gaunt, very frail. And I'd never seen him quite like that. And it was just, that part, it's like the guys from that movie Inside Out. One guy noticed it, and the other guys told him to shut the hell up. You're not dealing, no, don't even think about that. So I noticed it, but I went, nope, not gonna think about this. Nope, not gonna think about this. But he was still just as warm and engaging as ever. And we went out to dinner later that night with his wife, Suze, and we were just shooting the shit about the news and politics or whatever. Hardly talked about movies at all. And then we drove him back over across the street to his hotel, and he got out, and I said, George, I'll see you around. I'll see you at the next one. And he just turned and he went, yeah, all right. And that was the last time I saw him.
I grabbed my phone and I was scrolling through Twitter, and I saw a tweet from a friend of mine that had said he had heard that George passed. And I kind of stopped because in this day and age, you see that stuff. And I kept scrolling, and I saw another one. And at this point, I started to get worried. So I picked up the phone, and I texted his manager, and I just remember putting, is it true? And he replied, yeah.
I get a phone call from a friend, and she goes, "Did you hear yet?" And I was like, "No, what are you talking about?" She goes, "George Romero's dead." And I went, "No." And yeah. So then I looked it up, and I saw this article and that article, and George was dead. And I sat on my bed, and I sobbed. I fucking sobbed.
When I heard that George Romero passed away, there was a profound sadness, because it seemed like a lot of the joy, the camaraderie, and the unity that he brought to the filmmaking community and all of the actors and crew, everybody involved in his films had felt together. And it just felt like there was going to be a loss, and maybe that would just kind of, I hoped not, but I kind of thought maybe it would diminish.
On July 16th, 2017, George Andrew Romero passed away in his sleep after a battle with lung cancer. His wife, Suze Romero, and his daughter, Tina, were by his side, all while listening to the score of one of his favorite films, The Quiet Man. The outpouring of grief and loss was worldwide, not just from friends, family, and people that worked with George, but also from the wider film community.
You know, when Variety talked about his passing, I knew my circle of people knew who George Romero was. I knew the horror fans knew who George Romero was. I knew Fangoria, he was, a god in Fangoria, right? But the outside world, the real filmmakers, the Academy Awards and stuff, Variety knows who George Romero is, and a big piece on George and how he was so great and talented and amazing, and it's just like, holy hell, he wasn't just George. He was George fucking Romero.
3 months after his passing, George Romero was added to the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His widow, Suze, accepted the star on his behalf, with guest speakers Edgar Wright, Greg Nicotero, and Malcolm McDowell present.
You wake up the next day and you start thinking like, all right, he's not here, what do we do? Because George was always here. George was always going to give an interview, or he was going to be at the next show, and we were going to talk to him about what he was working on, and we didn't have him anymore.
Suze Romero founded the George A. Romero Foundation the following year, citing a responsibility to not only preserve George's legacy, but also celebrate pioneers in the film industry and inspire a new generation of filmmakers.
The way she tells it is that, like, sort of on, as he was beginning to fade, towards the end of his life, she said to him, how do you feel? How do you feel about your legacy and the films that you've made, this body of work? And he said, nobody gives a shit. She said, what are you talking about? You have millions of people that love you and your movies. He says, yeah, but I guess he didn't really feel validated as a filmmaker, Suzanne was determined, after he passed, to prove him wrong. She said, I'm just going to show you that you are, in fact, a worthy filmmaker, worthy of being remembered. Of course, he made his mark on movie history, but he never felt validated as a real filmmaker, even though the stories were coming out that he and Scorsese had been renting the same print of Tales of Hoffman, and some kid from Brooklyn rented it out. The kid from Brooklyn says, who the hell's got this now? Some kid from the Bronx rented it, never met, but they were renting the same movie from this archive.
And I think they do a lot of great work of trying to help figure out how to inspire the next generation of filmmakers.
As an initiative to preserve George's work, the George A. Romero Archives was created at the Hillman Library within the University of Pittsburgh.
The Romero Archive is quite large, a little over 100 boxes of material, and most of this is paper. So when you think about boxes of paper, that's a lot of material. It's really a testament of his creative history. He did struggle, and that wasn't always successful. And I don't think that that's a critique. I think that that's instructive, that he is considered one of the greatest horror filmmakers of all time. He's had this mass of influence. You know, he's always hailed as, you know, among these, you know, biggest directors, most important directors in horror, and yet he didn't get everything he ever wanted made. And I think that's good for aspiring writers and filmmakers to understand and to see that just because you wrote something and you sent it off and it got rejected doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. You'll just have to keep trying.
And hosted at the Monroeville Mall, where Dawn of the Dead was filmed nearly 50 years ago, Living Dead Weekend honors the work and legacy of zombie cinema, primarily the films of George Romero. Each year, thousands travel to the mall to meet the cast and crew of his films, partake in guest panels, and tour filming locations. On July 4th, 2021, the Monroeville Mall held a special ceremony in what was once the Clock Tower Court and renamed it Romero Court, with a bust crafted by Christian Stavrakis. George A. Romero's legacy continues to live on through a foundation that honors his legacy, through millions of fans that celebrate his work, and through those that still love and miss him.
George's films literally changed the face of horror as we know it.
Romero is a legend. We miss him. What he did for zombies, for horror, and for film in general, he'll never be forgotten.
There's so much more that he wanted to tell us. There's so many more stories, that he was so creative and so prolific. We can have this understanding of him now, and it's a shame that in some ways we couldn't have understood this while he was still alive.
I really wish I had had the chance to work with him.
He was a great loss to the filmmaking community and to the world in general.
The Resident Evil series exists because of him. My love for this series, all the friends I've made, is all because of him.
I would not be the man I am if it wasn't for George Romero.
I ran over and got him to sign an autograph for my brother Tom. I remember he wrote, "To Tom, when there's no room in hell, I'll see you in Pittsburgh."
I don't know where my life would be right now if it wasn't for George Romero.
It sparked a lot of people's love of him to be turned back up, and we have so much stuff going on in George's world now. I wish he was here to see it.
What he did was bring all of those people from all of those films into one big family. And all of the fans all around that are all part of that group too. So that is his legacy. It's not just the films that he made that are on a shelf or being watched at a particular time. It's that interconnection between all the people that he touched in his life.
I just want to thank everybody again. It's great to be here. And thanks particularly to the fans. I mean, I love you guys.
It's fabulous. You know, I love making the movies, and it's great that there's a game which is like a flashback to that genre. And it's, you know, I can feel maybe a little bit like I had some influence on it. I feel very flattered.